Hey everybody, it's snowing like crazy today. Snowing like crazy today, yeah. Just outside my store, snowing like mad. So I'm gonna close up and sorry, no visual today. You don't get to see my beautiful face. I know, you're missing out. You're missing out. I love you. Okay, so into my pocket you go. Sorry about that, but such is life. So, what do I want to talk about today? You know what's banging around in my head for a little while? I've been thinking an awful lot about capitalism and fascism. I talked a lot yesterday about fascism, and how there's a real moment where we have to choose between fascism or socialism. But there's something else that's been banging around in my head a long time, which is we call the system that we live under capitalism, and we call some kind of evil, abstract version of it fascism. But as I've done more research and as I've aged and as I keep looking around, I can see pretty clearly that capitalism is fascism and fascism is capitalism. Maybe the cleanest phrase that I've encountered is capitalism is fascism wearing a Mickey Mouse mask. That as long as we all cooperate with the monster that is fascism, then it's more than happy to put on a smiling face and say, yes, of course, we're all in this together, follow your dreams, I love you so much, here we are, as a collective, as a community. It's more than happy to speak those words and move along together collectively, so long as we cooperate. But the moment we step out of line, the moment that we are discarded by this system, the moment that it decides it doesn't need us and that we're discarded and abandoned, then the mask is removed, revealing the crazed sociopathic monster that lies underneath it, as it always had. It was simply obfuscated by this layer of propaganda, this layer of illusions, and this layer of lies that make capitalism up. Capitalism is defined first and foremost by the relationship between the employee and the employer. Employers own property, own assets, own hard material. They own these things because they claim to, and it's backed up through military force, through police force. The clearest example of this is a parcel of land that gets handed down from father to son. This parcel of land, of course, being originally stolen from a group of people who were using it. This is the typical story. And I consider that to be the standard story. No one owns any of this. They just claim to own it. Everyone is renting until they die. Because the whole concept of ownership of land is sort of a silly thing when you start to think about it. But I digress. What I want to talk about is how fascism and capitalism are the same thing. And the word fascism comes out of Italy. It begins, this whole fascism movement begins when the Italian capitalists elect Mussolini as their leader. Now, Mussolini works very closely with Adolf Hitler in World War II and is brought along in the war that Adolf Hitler was leading. Now, Mussolini is called a fascist because in Italian, I believe the word is fascicini or fascicili, something like that, means a party. And so they're not a fascist party, they're fascists, because fascist is interpreted as a party. It means a party of young men. And there's nothing controversial about that phrase, except that it's foreign. We don't know what it means. And so this is the word that capitalists used during World War II to describe capitalists who stood against their interests. Because Adolf Hitler's Germany was a capitalist society. It was a capitalist organization, and when he was appointed the leader of Germany by the democratically elected leader of Germany, he didn't run as a fascist. He wasn't a fascist until he stood against and with Mussolini and with other people in that region. And so the capitalists began to call them fascists in order to distinguish themselves from capitalists. The distinction between these two groups, between fascists and capitalists, has been further explored. But it's always with this idea, always with this base idea that, well, obviously these two are different things. They must be. So let's explore that. And from this sort of base assumption that these two are different come studies of fascism, 14 signs your society is declining into fascism. These are sort of popular phrases and popular ideas that have come out, but the base assumption is false. When you look at the 14 signs the society is declining into fascism, they apply just as easily to capitalist societies as they do to fascist societies, with very little difference. Really, if you look at them, you're just sort of saying, well, this is what a society looks like when it's being run by sociopaths. And these studies never actually analyze the structure of the society. Because if you were to look at the structure of fascism from an economic perspective, structurally, you would see very cleanly, well, there's still an employer, there's still an employee. The structure of capitalism remains intact. What changes to turn it from capitalism to fascism simply seems to be the target. If capitalism is done, if the victims of capitalism are foreigners, preferably non-white foreigners, well, then it's capitalism. Oh, these people, the benefits that they're gaining from us going into their homes, kidnapping their children, bombing the lands around them, stealing their resources. It's for their own good. This is a comment that is made by serious people in the United States at the highest levels of their government. That Brad Pitt had a movie called War Machine that investigated this very phenomenon of high-level officials and military generals believing that their invasion and destruction and theft of resources in a country was actually for the good of that country's citizenry. And they believe this to be true because they're on a crusade. So, if that's what's occurring, well, then that's capitalism. But once the capitalists turn on their own people and do the exact same thing to their own people, then it's fascism. Or if it's a white country that invades another white country, then it's fascism. The structure is the same. The power dynamic that exists between the worker and the employer is the same. In many cases, the activity is exactly the same. That if you are working in a corporation, you must abide by the rules of this corporation. And no matter how draconic those rules may or may not be. And just because they are enforced with a sort of smiling, simpering gladness makes them no less draconic and no less fascistic. We have this image in our mind that Nazis are fascists, that if it doesn't look like jackboots and tight, controlled movements, the little mustache, if it doesn't have this kind of authoritarian rage or passion that we think of when we think of figures like Adolf Hitler, then it cannot be fascism. But that has nothing to do with what fascism is. There have been plenty of non-fascist leaders who have had the passion, who have had the anger, who have had these sorts of things. What matters is what they are actually fighting for. And whether or not they are fighting to remove the structural injustice that exists, or whether they are fighting to continue to maintain that structural injustice. And throughout, since the beginning of the capitalist experiment, capitalism begins by buying up, when merchants in England buy up, or in Europe rather, buy up land from lords and nobles where serfs are living on them, and they force those serfs off the land of their ancestries into factories. William Blake writes about this. Does that sound like something maybe fascism would do? It does to me. It then, when it begins colonizing other countries, enslaving local populaces, throwing them into horrific conditions, whether through chattel slavery or wage slavery, it throws young black men into boats, ships them overseas to the colonies. Does this sound like something that maybe fascists would do? Because it sounds like fascism to me, except back then we called it capitalism. And so this whole separation between capitalism and fascism is one that's required by the capitalist class, so that they can pretend as though they are better than the fascists, when the reality is that they are fascists. Their system is fascism. Maybe they as an individual are better than the fascists like Adolf Hitler, who exterminated 6 million Jews. Maybe that's true. But the system they're under is the same system that Adolf Hitler was under. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say that people in your mom and pop shop are fascists. I am trying to say that they are operating within a system that is fascism. The only thing that seems to act as a stopper, or rather act as a pressure valve, a pressure release valve, is our democratic system. That Adolf Hitler's affront by removing the democratic system, by declaring himself king and dictator, which could very well happen in the United States. If the military decides that the democratic structure in the United States is no longer servicing them, they'll just get rid of it. As long as it goes along with what they want, they'll maintain it, because it's a useful tool to funnel energy into. But if they have to remove it because it's become too bothersome or cumbersome or costly to maintain, they will. And the capitalist system that we live under, it requires this distinction, the distinction between fascism and capitalism, so that it can claim a difference between these two, that there's a moral separation, that there isn't a clean step into fascism. There's like a line that exists that they must create, that they must abide by. And as long as they abide by that line, well, then they're not fascists, they're capitalists. The cleanest example would be if you're a racist. Racism is a clear line that has been drawn in the sand by the left, not the right, by the left, has drawn this clean line in the sand and said, if you are a racist, you are a danger. And we can say that. And the reason we can say that is because coming out of World War II, racism seemed to be a very important feature. But what we haven't gotten to is we haven't gotten to saying, if you support a system of domination and control that insists an employee must sell its labor to an employer, that is also unacceptable. We haven't got it to that point because we haven't yet understood that that systemic control has been so baked in to the structure of our society through violence, through fear, and through the passing down from one generation to another of this system of domination and control. This system is so ingrained that conservatives and fascists, they want to tell you that it's natural. They want you to believe that the system you're living under is predestined and preordained, as if it's in our DNA. This is an argument for the divine right of kings, that their rule is given down by some sort of divine power, which is total nonsense and complete hogwash. With anyone with a spine or a spirit to stand against it. This is an argument that says a man with a club should always get what he wants, which is fundamentally what they're saying. Because if you look at nature and if you look at history, violence, domination, and control are how things get done. And that's how things get done, whether you call yourself a fascist or a capitalist. Because at the end of the day, they're the same thing. All right, I love you guys. Have fun out there. Hold your friends and family close. Good luck and have fun.